The bullet that grazed Olivia Walker's shoulder in the dusty streets of Spokane, Washington in the spring of 1882 should have been the worst thing to happen that Tuesday afternoon, but the gang of 3 men who followed her home proved far more persistent than the wound itself. She pressed her back against the inside of her cabin door, heart thundering, listening to their boots scrunch on the dirt outside while Zeus, her 100-pound mastiff mix, positioned himself between her and the door with hackles raised and a rumble building deep in his barrel chest that promised violence to anyone foolish enough to enter. "Come on out, pretty lady," one of them called, his voice slurred with whiskey. "We just want to talk about that money your daddy owed before he died." Olivia gritted her teeth against the burning in her shoulder where the bullet had torn through fabric and skin. Her father had been dead 3 months, buried on the hill overlooking the Spokane River, and she had thought his gambling debts died with him. Apparently she was wrong. Zeus growled louder, sensing her fear, his massive head level with her waist, as he stared at the door like he could see through the wooden planks to the threats beyond. "I do not have any money," she called back, trying to keep her voice steady. "Whatever he owed, it is gone. The ranch barely keeps us fed." Laughter answered her, mean and sharp. "Then maybe you got other ways to pay, sweetheart." The words sent ice down her spine. She reached for the rifle mounted above the door, but her injured shoulder screamed in protest and her fingers barely brushed the stock before she had to lower her arm. Zeus sensed her distress and his growl deepened, becoming almost a roar. The dog had been her constant companion since her father brought him home as a puppy 5 years ago. And in the months since her father's death, Zeus had become increasingly protective, barely tolerating the shopkeepers in town and positioning himself between Olivia and any man who came within 10 feet of her. The men outside tried the door handle. Zeus lunged forward, slamming his weight against the door hard enough to rattle it in its frame, barking with such ferocity that even through the wood she heard the men stumble backward with curses. Gunshots cracked through the air, splintering the door frame, and Olivia threw herself sideways, landing hard on her injured shoulder with a cry of pain she could not suppress. Zeus did not move from his post, though she could see blood welling from a graze along his flank where a bullet had found him through a gap in the door. The sight of his blood made fury override her fear. She crawled toward the back window, thinking to climb through and make for the woods, but her vision swam with pain and blood loss. The world tilted sideways. She woke to the sound of more gunshots, but these came from a different direction. Zeus was still at the door, but his growling had changed pitch, becoming uncertain. Male voices shouted outside, some retreating, one commanding them to drop their weapons. Then silence, heavy and ringing in her ears. A knock came at the door, gentle despite the circumstances. "Madam, those men are gone. I am not here to hurt you. My name is Thomas Oakley. I was riding past and saw trouble." Olivia tried to push herself up, but her arms would not cooperate. Zeus barked once, sharp and warning, still on guard. She heard the man outside sigh, then the sound of boots moving away from the door. Through the broken slats, she glimpsed him, a tall figure in a dusty brown coat and worn hat, leading his horse toward the side of the cabin where he would be visible through the window if she looked. She crawled to the window, using the wall to pull herself up enough to peer out. The man stood perhaps 20 feet away, his hands visible and empty, his horse's reins loose in one hand. He was younger than she expected, maybe 25 or 26 to her 22 years, with a lean, weathered face that spoke of years under the sun and dark hair that curled at his collar beneath his hat. His eyes, when they met hers through the window glass, were a startling blue, concerned but cautious. "You are hurt," he said, loud enough to carry, but not shouting. "I can see blood on your dress. Let me help." "My dog will tear you apart," Olivia managed, her voice weaker than she wanted. Thomas nodded slowly. "I figured as much. That's a good dog you have. Loyal. But madam, you are going to bleed out if someone does not tend that wound, and I am the only someone here right now." He was right, and she knew it. Already her vision was starting to gray at the edges again. "What do you want?" she asked, because in her experience, men always wanted something. Nothing, he said simply. Well, that is not entirely true. I would like to make sure you do not die. Beyond that, I will be on my way once I know you are safe. There was something in his voice, a quiet sincerity that cut through her fear. Or maybe she was just too tired and hurt to maintain it. The door is barred, she said. I cannot make it there to open it. The back door? Same. Thomas studied her through the window, then looked at his horse, then back at her. All right, here's what we are going to do. I'm going to sit down right here in the dirt where you can see me. I am not going to move toward the cabin. I am not going to try anything. I am just going to sit. When that dog of yours calms down enough that you think you might make it to the door, you let me know. If that takes an hour, it takes an hour. If it takes all night, well, I have spent worse nights sleeping under stars. Before she could respond, he did exactly as he said. He sat down in the dirt, cross-legged like a child, his hands resting on his knees, his horse standing patiently beside him. Olivia watched him, waiting for the trick, the sudden movement, the reveal of his true intentions. But Thomas just sat there, occasionally glancing at her through the window with that same concerned expression, but mostly looking out at the horizon or down at his hands. Zeus had stopped barking when the man sat down, but the growling continued, lower now, more uncertain. The dog kept looking back at Olivia, then at the door, then at the window where the stranger sat motionless in the yard. Minutes passed. The sun moved across the sky, and Thomas did not move except to shift his weight slightly when his horse nuzzled at his shoulder. Olivia felt her strength continuing to drain away with her blood, but something in the man's patience, his willingness to wait, started to ease the knot of panic in her chest. "Why are you doing this?" she called through the broken door. "Doing what?" Thomas called back. "Sitting there, waiting. Most men would have kicked the door in by now or ridden on." She saw him shrug, a casual roll of his shoulders. "Most men are fools. Your dog is protecting you like he should. I respect that. And forcing my way in would just prove to both of you that I am exactly the kind of threat you should be afraid of. I am not that man." "You shot at those men." "I shot over their heads mostly. They ran because they were cowards who prey on people they think cannot fight back. They were not expecting anyone to interfere." He paused. "One of them might have a bullet in his leg. He was aiming at your door when I fired. I am not particularly sorry about that." Despite everything, Olivia felt a small, slightly hysterical laugh bubble up. "You are very calm about all this. Panic does not help much in my experience." He tilted his head to look at her through the window again. "How are you feeling, honestly?" "Honestly, like I might faint again." His jaw tightened. "Then we need to move this along. Is there any way you can toss something out to your dog that might distract him? Food, maybe, or a favorite toy?" "He will not leave his post." "Not leave it, just get distracted for 5 seconds so you can tell him I'm all right. Dogs understand tone. If you call me by name, tell him I'm a friend. It might help." It was worth trying. Olivia had a strip of dried meat in her pocket, meant for Zeus on the ride home from town that never happened. She pulled it out, her hand shaking, and called to her dog. "Zeus, come here, boy, come here." The mastiff's ears swiveled toward her, but he did not move from the door. She tried again, putting more force into her voice despite the way it made her shoulder scream. "Zeus, come!" This time he took 2 steps toward her, and then stopped, looking back at the door. Olivia tossed the meat toward him, and he caught it from the air, but his attention immediately returned to his guard position. "That's all right," Thomas called. "You tried. Let us give it more time." So they gave it more time. Thomas sat in the dirt as the afternoon stretched toward evening, and Olivia leaned against the window frame because she could not stand anymore. She watched him, this strange cowboy who had ridden into her crisis and refused to leave, but also refused to force himself on her hospitality. Twice he pulled out a canteen and drank, and once he ate something from his saddlebag, but always slowly, always with his hands visible, always returning to that same patient sitting position. Zeus's growls became intermittent, then stopped altogether. The dog sat down, still facing the door, but his posture had relaxed slightly. His head kept turning toward the window, toward the man sitting so impossibly still in the yard. "Tell me something about yourself," Olivia called out, surprising herself. "If you are going to sit in my yard all evening, I should know more than your name." Thomas glanced up at her, and she thought she saw a hint of a smile. "What do you want to know?" "Where are you from? Where are you going?" "Born in Montana, worked ranches from here to Texas. I am headed nowhere in particular at the moment. Thought I might find work around Spokane for the summer, then move on before the snows come." "You are a drifter." "I prefer to think of myself as a man who has not found the right place to stop drifting yet." He paused. "What about you? You were born here?" "Close enough. My father brought us here when I was 12. My mother died that first winter. It was just him and me after that." She did not know why she was telling him this, except that talking seemed to keep the darkness at bay. "He died in January. Fell through the ice on the river checking his traps." "I am sorry." The words were simple, but she heard genuine sympathy in them. "Those men," she continued, needing to fill the silence now that she had started, "they said he owed them money. Gambling debts. I did not know about any debts. Men like that often invent debts where none exist, especially when they think they have found an easy mark." "You think they made it up?" "I think even if your father did owe them something, it died with him. Legal debts die with the debtor if there is no estate. They were just trying to scare you." His voice hardened. "Or worse." Olivia closed her eyes briefly. "Thank you for stopping them." "You are welcome." Another long silence fell. The sun was getting lower, painting the sky orange and pink. Olivia's shoulder had gone from burning pain to a dull, throbbing ache that she knew meant she was in real trouble. She needed to do something soon. "Thomas," she said, testing the name, trying to make her voice warm instead of afraid. "Thomas Oakley." Zeus's head snapped toward the window, his ears perked forward. She tried again. "Thomas is a friend. He is here to help." The dog made a small, uncertain sound, not quite a whine, not quite a growl. Thomas remained perfectly still, barely breathing, letting the dog process the information in his own time. "You are a good boy, Zeus," Olivia continued, her voice getting weaker. "Such a good boy, but I need help, and Thomas is going to help me. Please, Zeus, please trust him." The mastiff stood up, took 3 steps toward her, then looked back at the door, torn between his protective instincts and his devotion to his mistress. Olivia knew she was asking him to go against everything in his nature, every instinct that told him strange men were threats, but she was out of options. "I am coming to the door," Thomas said quietly, "just to the door. I'm going to stand up now, very slowly." He rose from the dirt with the careful, measured movements of a man approaching a spooked horse. Zeus immediately barked, but it was a single sharp bark, a warning rather than an attack. Thomas stopped moving, standing now but still 20 feet from the cabin. "Good dog," he said, his voice calm and low. "You are a very good dog, Zeus. You have done your job so well, she is lucky to have you." Zeus's tail twitched. Just the smallest movement, not quite a wag, but not the stiff flag of aggression either. Thomas took 1 small step forward. Zeus barked again, but this time his tail definitely moved, confusion warring with instinct. "That is right," Thomas continued, taking another small step. "I know you do not know me. I know I am a stranger, but your mistress needs help, and I am here to give it. That is all. Just help." Step by slow step, Thomas crossed the yard. It took 10 minutes to cover 20 feet, and every muscle in his body was tense, ready to retreat at the first sign of genuine attack. When he reached the door, he stopped, not touching it, his hands still visible and loose at his sides. "Olivia," he said quietly, "can you reach the bar? Can you lift it?" She pushed away from the window, stumbling toward the door, her vision swimming. Her hands found the heavy wooden bar that held it shut, and she tried to lift it, but her injured shoulder would not cooperate, and her other arm did not have the strength alone. "I cannot," she gasped. "I am sorry. I cannot." "All right. All right, just step back. Step back and sit down if you can. Zeus, I am coming in now. I am sorry, but your mistress needs help. Thomas put his hand on the door and pushed. The bar held. He pushed harder, and Olivia heard the wood starting to crack. Zeus erupted into furious barking, launching himself at the door, and for a horrible moment she thought the dog would tear through and attack the man trying to save her life. But Thomas did not force it. He stopped pushing, stepped back, and Zeus's barking subsided into growls. Different approach, Thomas muttered. He walked around the side of the cabin and Olivia heard him testing the back door, then the sound of a knife working at the window frame. The window in the main room slid open and Thomas's head appeared in the opening. Zeus charged toward him with a roar, and Thomas held up one hand. Easy, easy, Zeus. Look, I am not even coming in yet. See, just my head, just checking on her. His eyes found Olivia, crumpled on the floor near the door, and his expression went tight with worry. I am coming through. I am sorry, but this cannot wait anymore. He pulled himself through the window with the ease of someone used to physical work, landing in a crouch inside the cabin. Zeus launched himself at Thomas, 80 pounds of furious protective instinct, and Thomas went down under the assault, rolling to protect his throat, his arms coming up to shield his face. But something happened that surprised them both. Zeus's teeth never found flesh. The dog stood over Thomas, paws on his chest, growling into his face, but not biting, not attacking, testing. Thomas lay absolutely still, barely breathing, his eyes meeting the dog's. Good boy, he whispered. You are such a good boy. I am not going to hurt her. I promise you, I promise. Zeus leaned down and sniffed Thomas's face, his neck, his hands. The growling continued but grew uncertain. Thomas very slowly moved one hand, just an inch, toward the dog. Zeus growled louder, a warning. Thomas stopped moving. Zeus! Olivia called weakly. Please, please, baby, let him help! The dog's head swiveled toward her, then back to Thomas. Something in his canine brain seemed to make a decision. Zeus stepped off Thomas's chest and moved to position himself between the two humans, still watchful, still alert, but no longer actively aggressive. Thomas sat up slowly, his hands still visible, still moving with that same careful deliberation. Thank you, he said to the dog, and Zeus's tail gave one small, uncertain wag. Then Thomas's attention shifted fully to Olivia, and he crossed the space between them in 3 quick strides, dropping to his knees beside her. Let me see, he said, his hands gentle as they moved to her shoulder. Zeus growled low in his throat, and Thomas paused. It is all right. I am just looking. I am helping her. He peeled back the blood-soaked fabric of her dress, and Olivia heard him draw in a sharp breath. The bullet went clean through. That is good. But you have lost a lot of blood, and the wound needs to be cleaned and packed. He looked around the cabin, taking in the sparse furnishings, the simple layout. Do you have clean cloth, whiskey, needle, and thread? Olivia nodded toward the shelf near the cold stove. There, and water in the barrel. Thomas moved quickly now that Zeus had accepted his presence, though the dog tracked his every movement with intense focus. He built up the fire, set water to boil, gathered supplies. His movement spoke of experience, of someone who had done this before probably too many times. This is going to hurt, he warned, as he returned to her side with a bowl of hot water and clean rags. I will be as gentle as I can, but I need to clean it thoroughly. She nodded, biting her lip as he began to work. He was gentle despite his warning, his hands sure and steady as he cleaned the wound. And when she cried out, he murmured apologies and encouragement in equal measure. Zeus pressed close to her other side, offering what comfort he could, occasionally licking her hand, his presence a warm, solid reassurance that despite everything, her protector was still there. Thomas worked in concentrated silence, cleaning, packing the wound with clean cloth, bandaging it tightly. When he finished, he sat back on his heels and wiped sweat from his forehead. You need rest and liquids. When did you last eat? This morning, before I went to town. He shook his head. You need food. Do you have anything? There is stew from yesterday in the pot. She gestured weakly toward the stove. Thomas found the pot, sniffed the contents, and deemed it safe. He reheated it over the fire he had built, and soon the cabin filled with the smell of venison and vegetables. Zeus finally left Olivia's side to investigate the source of the smell, and Thomas carefully ladled some of the stew into a bowl, cooled it with well water, and set it on the floor for the dog. Zeus looked at the food, then at Thomas, then at Olivia. She nodded. It is all right. Eat. Permission granted, Zeus ate with the single-minded intensity of a dog who had been on high alert for hours and was suddenly ravenous. Thomas brought a bowl to Olivia, helped her sit up against the wall, and held the bowl while she sipped from the spoon with shaking hands. Slowly, he cautioned. Your stomach will rebel if you eat too fast after blood loss. She ate slowly, feeling warmth and strength start to return to her limbs. Thomas ate standing up, his eyes constantly moving between her and the doors and windows, still on guard even now. When they had both eaten, he cleaned the bowls and put them away, then brought her more water. You should sleep, he said. Your body needs rest to heal. Where will you go? The words came out before she could think better of them, and she heard the fear in her voice at the thought of being alone again. Thomas glanced at the window, where full darkness had fallen. Nowhere tonight. Those men might come back, and you are in no condition to defend yourself. I will stay if you will allow it. I will sleep out in the yard with my horse. That is foolish. There is a barn, if you would prefer, but the night will be cold, and you have already done so much. She hesitated, then made a decision that might have been brave, or might have been the delirium of blood loss and exhaustion. There is a bedroll in the corner. You can sleep here by the fire. Zeus will tell me if you try anything. Thomas looked at the dog, who had finished his meal, and returned to Olivia's side, lying down with his massive head on her lap. I believe he would, Thomas said, and there was something that might have been amusement in his voice. All right, thank you. I will stay in here by the fire. He retrieved the bedroll she had indicated and spread it on the floor between her and the door, positioning himself as another barrier between her and any threat that might come. Then he removed his gun belt, hung it on a peg near the door where it would be accessible if needed but not on his person, another gesture of trust and safety. Olivia managed to pull herself up and stumble to her own narrow bed with Thomas's help, Zeus following like a shadow. The dog jumped up onto the bed beside her, a habit her father would never have allowed, but which she had permitted in the lonely months since his death. Zeus curled against her uninjured side, warm and solid, his eyes fixed on the cowboy by the fire. Thank you, Olivia said into the darkness, for everything. I would be dead if you had not come. You would have found a way, Thomas replied. You are tougher than you think, but you are welcome. Sleep took her quickly, dragged under by exhaustion and blood loss, and the strange sense of safety she felt with this quiet cowboy keeping watch and her loyal dog pressed against her side. She woke sometime in the night to the sound of Zeus growling, but when she forced her eyes open, she saw that the dog's tail was wagging slowly, and Thomas was sitting up in his bedroll, holding out his hand for Zeus to sniff. The dog stretched his neck forward, maintaining the distance between them, but investigating with interest. Thomas did not move, just sat there in the dying firelight, letting the dog come to him on his own terms. Zeus sniffed Thomas's hand, then his wrist, then sat back and cocked his head as if considering something very important. Then, in a gesture that made Olivia's heart squeeze unexpectedly, Zeus lowered his massive head and bumped it against Thomas's hand, asking for affection. Thomas's face split into a quiet smile, and he slowly, carefully scratched behind Zeus's ears. Good boy, he whispered. Very good boy, see? Not so bad, am I? Zeus's tail wagged harder, and he pushed his head more firmly into Thomas's hand, accepting the man who had been patient enough to earn his trust. Olivia closed her eyes again, something warm blooming in her chest that had nothing to do with fever and everything to do with the image of this stranger giving her dog the patience and respect that most men would never consider. When she woke again, it was to gray morning light filtering through the window and the smell of coffee. She pushed herself upright with her good arm, her shoulder protesting but not screaming as it had the day before. Thomas was at the stove making breakfast, and Zeus was lying on the floor beside him, watching with interest as the cowboy worked. "You are still here," she said, and could not keep the surprise from her voice. Thomas turned and she saw that his face was shadowed with stubble, and his eyes were tired. "Did you think I would leave?" "Most men would have." "We have established I'm not most men." He poured coffee into a tin cup and brought it to her. "How are you feeling?" "Sore. Weak, but alive." She took the coffee gratefully. "Did you sleep at all?" "Some. I am a light sleeper by nature. Years of trail work." He returned to the stove and dished scrambled eggs onto 2 plates. "I found eggs in your chicken coop and hope you do not mind me using them. Figured you need protein to recover." "I do not mind." She watched him move around her small kitchen with easy competence, Zeus now following him like they had been companions for years rather than hours. "He likes you." Thomas glanced at the dog, and that quiet smile returned. "We came to an understanding in the night. I think he figured out I was sincere about not being a threat. Not many men would have had the patience for that. Then not many men deserve the trust of a good dog." He brought her a plate and sat down on the floor near her bed, his own plate balanced on his knee. Zeus immediately positioned himself between them, but now it seemed less about protection and more about wanting to be close to both of them at once. "You should eat. Build up your strength." They ate in comfortable silence, and Olivia found herself studying Thomas in the morning light. He was handsome in a worn, weathered way, all lean muscle and sun-browned skin, with fine lines at the corners of his eyes that suggested he smiled often, even if he did not seem inclined to do so in her presence. There was a scar along his jaw, old and faded, and another that disappeared into his collar. His hands were scarred too, the hands of a man who worked hard and lived harder. "You can leave now," she said, after she had eaten everything on her plate, though the words felt wrong in her mouth. "I will be fine. You have done more than enough." Thomas set his plate aside and looked at her with those startling blue eyes. "Those men might come back. You are still in no condition to defend yourself. I would like to stay at least for a few days to make sure you are healing properly and that they do not return, if you will allow it." "I cannot pay you." "I am not asking for payment." "Then what are you asking for?" She heard the challenge in her voice. The years of learning that nothing came free, especially not from men. Thomas considered the question seriously. "A place to sleep, meals while I am here, and maybe the chance to help you with whatever work needs doing around this place. I saw on my way in that your fence line is down in 3 places, your barn roof is sagging, and the gate to your chicken coop is held closed with rope instead of a proper latch. I could fix those things. Earn my keep. And then what? You just leave when you decide I'm safe enough?" "If that is what you want, yes." Olivia wanted to argue, wanted to find the trap in his offer, but she could not. And the truth was she was afraid of those men coming back, afraid of being alone and injured with no one to turn to. The nearest neighbor was 3 miles away, and they had made it clear after her father's death that they expected her to fail and sell out. Not to mention that the husband had already made an uncomfortable suggestion about how she might pay him for help with the spring planting. "All right," she said finally, "you can stay. For a few days. Until we are sure they will not come back." Thomas nodded, and she saw relief flicker across his face, though she could not imagine why her acceptance would matter so much to him. "Thank you. I will do my best to be useful and stay out of your way." He was true to his word. Over the next 3 days, Thomas worked from sunrise to sunset, repairing fence lines, patching the barn roof, fixing the chicken coop gate, and a dozen other small problems that Olivia had been managing around or ignoring entirely. He worked with quiet competence, never complaining, never asking for anything beyond the meals she insisted on preparing despite his protests that she should be resting. Zeus followed Thomas everywhere, the dog's devotion transferring from solely Olivia to include this patient cowboy who moved with calm confidence and never raised his voice or his hand in anger. She watched from the window as man and dog worked together, Thomas occasionally stopping to scratch Zeus's ears or throw a stick for him to fetch, and she felt something shifting in her chest. Walls she had built carefully over years of watching her father's decline and managing alone in a world that saw a single woman as either prey or opportunity. On the third evening, Thomas came in from his work to find Olivia up and moving around the cabin, stirring a pot of beans over the fire. "You should be resting," he said immediately, concern creasing his forehead. "I have been resting for 3 days. I will lose my mind if I rest any longer." She turned to face him, noting the way Zeus had come in with him, and now sat with his tail thumping against the floor, looking between them like he was pleased to have his two favorite people in the same room. "Besides, you have been doing all the work around here. The least I can do is cook a proper meal." "Your meals have been more than proper." "They have been stew and beans and bread. Tonight you get a roast, because I am feeling strong enough to properly thank you for everything you have done." Thomas opened his mouth as if to argue, then seemed to think better of it. "All right, thank you. I will just wash up then." He went outside to the pump, and Olivia found herself watching through the window again, watching the way he moved, efficient and graceful despite his size. When he returned, his face and hands clean, his hair damp and pushed back from his forehead, she felt her breath catch slightly and had to turn back to the stove to hide her reaction. They ate dinner at the small table, the first time they had sat together like this, and conversation came easier than it had before. Thomas told her about the ranches he had worked, the places he had seen, always moving, never settling. She told him about growing up in this cabin, about the dreams she had of expanding the small ranch, maybe running cattle or breeding horses, if she could ever save enough money and figure out how to manage it alone. "You would not have to manage it alone if you had help," Thomas said carefully. "Help costs money I do not have, and hiring hands means trusting them, which is its own risk." "Fair enough." He was quiet for a moment, then said, "Those men have not come back." "No." "I rode into town yesterday to pick up supplies and asked around about them. Turns out they left Spokane on the morning stage after our encounter. Word is they decided Washington territory was not as friendly as they had hoped." Relief washed through Olivia, but it was tangled with something that felt uncomfortably like disappointment. "Then I am safe." "You are safe from them, at least." "Which means you will be leaving. Like you said, a few days until I was safe." She kept her voice carefully neutral, focusing on her plate instead of his face. "I suppose I should." Thomas did not sound happy about it. "Unless you might have use for a hired hand after all. I would work for room and board and a small wage, whatever you could afford once the ranch starts turning a profit. I am good with horses and decent with cattle. I can build and repair most things, and Zeus has gotten used to having me around." The dog's ears perked up at his name, and his tail began to wag. Olivia looked up at Thomas and found him watching her with an expression she could not quite read, something vulnerable beneath his usual calm. "Why?" she asked. "Why would you want to stay here? You said yourself you like to keep moving." Thomas was quiet for a long moment, his fingers tracing patterns on the worn wood of the table. "I have been moving for 7 years, he said finally. "Always looking for something, though I never could say what, working jobs that did not matter for people who did not care, sleeping under stars or in bunkhouses with 20 other men, and waking up every morning feeling like there should be more to life than this." He looked up and met her eyes. "I have been here less than a week, and this place feels more like home than anywhere I have been since my parents died, and I left Montana. Maybe that is foolish. Maybe it is too soon to say something like that, But you asked me to be honest, so I am. Olivia's heart was pounding against her ribs. That is honest. If it makes you uncomfortable, I can still leave. I do not want to impose or make you feel obligated. It does not make me uncomfortable. The words came out softer than she intended. It makes me feel less alone, which is terrifying in its own way because I have gotten used to being alone. I have gotten used to not depending on anyone. I understand that. Thomas's voice was gentle. But maybe we could try depending on each other, just a little. Partners, working this ranch together. Nothing more than that unless... He trailed off, then shook his head. I am getting ahead of myself. I just want a chance to stay to prove I am worth having around, if you will give me that chance. Olivia thought about the last 3 days watching him work with tireless dedication. She thought about the way he had sat in her yard for hours waiting for her dog to trust him. She thought about his hands, gentle on her wound, and his patience, endless and kind. She thought about waking in the night to see Zeus finally accepting his affection, and the warm feeling that had spread through her chest at the sight. All right, she said, and watched his face light up with a smile that transformed him from handsome to beautiful. You can stay. We will be partners. But Thomas, if you hurt me or prove to be anything other than what you seem, Zeus will not be the only one you have to worry about. I shoot as well as my father did, and I do not miss twice. I would not expect anything less. He held out his hand across the table, formal, sealing the agreement. Partners, then. She took his hand and felt the calluses on his palm, the strength in his grip, the warmth that seemed to spread from the point of contact up her arm and into her chest. Partners. Spring turned to summer, and the ranch began to transform under their combined efforts. Thomas proved to be everything he had promised and more, working with the kind of focused intensity that spoke of a man who had finally found something worth fighting for. They repaired every fence line on the property, fixed the barn completely, and built a new chicken coop that was secure against foxes and raccoons. Thomas rode into town and came back with 3 young horses that he had gotten for a good price, saying they would be the start of the breeding program Olivia had dreamed about. They worked side by side from dawn until dusk, and slowly Olivia found herself relaxing in his presence, trusting him in ways she had not trusted anyone since her father's death. Thomas never pushed, never demanded more than she was willing to give. He slept in the barn, even though she had offered him the bedroll by the fire again, maintaining a respectful distance that she appreciated even as part of her started to wish he was closer. Zeus, for his part, had become utterly devoted to Thomas. The dog still protected Olivia fiercely when they went into town, or when strangers approached the property. But with Thomas, he was gentle and playful, wrestling in the yard at the end of long workdays or sleeping at the foot of Thomas's bedroll in the barn. Watching them together made something in Olivia's chest ache with a longing she had thought she had buried years ago. One evening in late July, after a particularly brutal day of work clearing stones from the south pasture in preparation for planting hay, they sat on the porch together watching the sun set over the pine-covered hills. Zeus was sprawled between them, panting happily, his head on Thomas's thigh. The air was warm and sweet with the smell of wild roses that grew along the fence line. I have been thinking, Thomas said after a long, comfortable silence. We should go into town this weekend. There is a dance at the community hall. People have been asking me why they never see you anymore, and I think some of them are starting to worry. Olivia had been avoiding town as much as possible, sending Thomas in for supplies and relying on him to handle the social interactions she found exhausting. I do not dance. Neither do I, particularly well, but it would be good for people to see us together to understand that you have help now. Might discourage anyone else who was thinking of trying what those men tried. He glanced at her. And it might be nice to do something that is not work, just for one evening. She wanted to argue, but the hopeful look on his face stopped her. Thomas asked for so little, worked so hard, and never complained. One evening of socializing seemed a small price to pay. All right, but if anyone asks me to dance, Zeus is coming with me. Thomas laughed, a sound she had heard more often as the weeks passed and which never failed to make her smile in response. I think that might defeat the social purpose, but I will defend your right to have the biggest, most intimidating dance partner in Washington Territory. The dance was exactly as uncomfortable as Olivia had anticipated, full of nosy questions and speculative looks between her and Thomas, but he stayed close, deflecting the worst of the gossip with easy charm and introducing himself to everyone as her business partner and hired hand, nothing more. She saw the disappointment on some faces and the relief on others, and realized that Thomas had been right about people worrying. Half the town had apparently been waiting for her to fail and disappear, and the other half had been worried about her but too uncertain to offer help to a proud woman who made it clear she did not want pity. She danced once with Thomas, who admitted he had lied about his skills because he waltzed her around the floor with competent grace, one hand warm at her waist, the other holding hers carefully, as if she might break. "You said you could not dance," she accused, looking up at him. "I said I did not dance particularly well. This is the extent of my abilities. One waltz, learned from my mother when I was 14. His eyes were warm as they looked down at her. "But I wanted to dance with you, so I may have understated my incompetence." "Why?" The question came out breathless, and she blamed it on the movement, not the way his hand tightened slightly at her waist. "Because you look beautiful tonight, and because I wanted an excuse to hold you without overstepping the bounds of partnership." His voice was low, meant only for her beneath the music and chatter. "Because I have been wanting to hold you for weeks now, and I am running out of patience with myself." Olivia's breath caught. "Thomas!" "I know, I am sorry. I promise partnership and nothing more. Forget I said anything." But he did not let her go, and she did not pull away, and they finished the dance in charged silence, her heart racing against her ribs. They rode home in the wagon with Zeus between them, both unusually quiet. The moon was bright overhead, turning the landscape silver and strange. When they reached the ranch and Thomas helped her down from the wagon, his hands lingered at her waist for just a moment longer than necessary. "I meant what I said," he told her, his voice rough. "About wanting to hold you, about running out of patience, but I will not push. This is your home, your ranch, your life. I am just grateful to be part of it in whatever capacity you will allow." Olivia looked up at him. This man who had proven himself over and over, who had been patient when others would have demanded, who had earned the trust of her dog and, somewhere along the way, her heart. "What if I want more than partnership?" she whispered. Thomas went very still. "Olivia? What if I have been lying to myself about what I want? What if I have been so focused on keeping my walls up that I missed the fact that you have been slowly, carefully taking them down brick by brick?" She reached up and touched his face, feeling the rasp of stubble beneath her palm. "What if I trust you, Thomas Oakley? What if I more than trust you?" "Then I would be the luckiest man in Washington Territory." He turned his face into her palm, kissing it gently, his eyes never leaving hers. "But I need you to be sure. I need you to know that if we do this, I'm not going anywhere. I am not leaving come autumn. I'm not drifting on when something better comes along. You would be stuck with me." "That sounds less like a warning and more like a promise." "It is both." He pulled her closer, slowly, giving her every chance to retreat. "I am in love with you, Olivia Walker. I think I have been since I watched you lying on the floor of your cabin, wounded and bleeding, still trying to protect yourself, still fierce despite everything. You are the strongest person I have ever met, and the kindest, and I do not deserve you. But I will spend every day trying to, if you will let me." Olivia felt tears prick her eyes, not from sadness, but from the overwhelming rightness of this moment. "I love you too. I did not want to. I fought it. But watching you with Zeus, watching you work yourself to exhaustion for a ranch that is not even yours, watching you be patient and kind and strong and good, I could not help it." Thomas kissed her then, gentle and careful, like she was something precious. She kissed him back, pouring weeks of suppressed longing into it, and felt him shudder against her. Zeus barked once, sharp and questioning, and they broke apart with breathless laughter. "Even now he is protecting you," Thomas said, scratching behind the dog's ears. "Good boy, Zeus, but I promise I am allowed this one." Zeus's tail wagged, and he butted his head against their legs as if giving his approval. They stood there in the moonlight, holding each other, and Olivia felt something she had not felt since before her father died. She felt safe. She felt hopeful. She felt like maybe, just maybe, life could be more than surviving day to day. They married in September in a small ceremony at the church in Spokane, with Zeus sitting at their feet during the vows and half the town in attendance, curious to see the reclusive Olivia Walker finally letting someone into her life. Thomas moved his things from the barn into the cabin, and they spent the autumn preparing for winter, working side by side as always, but now with the ease of people who knew they belonged to each other. The ranch prospered under their joint management. The horses Thomas had bought proved to be excellent breeding stock, and by the following spring they had foals to sell at good prices. They added cattle, just a small herd to start, and Thomas's skill with animals meant they thrived. Olivia handled the business side, negotiating prices and managing their modest savings with the same fierce determination she brought to everything. Their first child was born in the spring of 1884, a boy they named Samuel after Thomas's father. Zeus appointed himself the baby's guardian, lying beside the cradle for hours, his watchful eyes tracking every movement. Thomas was a devoted father, patient and gentle with his son in the same way he had been with Zeus, in the same way he was with Olivia. She watched him walk the floor with Samuel in the middle of the night, singing soft lullabies in a surprisingly good voice, and fell in love with him all over again. 3 years later, their daughter arrived, Lucy, named for Olivia's mother. She had her father's blue eyes and her mother's determination, and from the moment she could walk, she followed Thomas everywhere, with Zeus following her, a chain of devotion that made Olivia laugh every time she saw it. The ranch continued to grow. They built a larger barn, expanded the house to accommodate their growing family, and became known throughout the region for their quality horses and their honest dealings. Thomas never lost his patient, quiet manner, though he smiled more as the years passed, the lines around his eyes deepening with laughter rather than worry. On their 10th anniversary, they sat on the porch together watching Samuel chase Lucy through the yard while Zeus supervised with the dignity of his advancing age. The dog was gray around the muzzle now, slower than he had been, but still devoted, still protective of his family. "Do you ever regret it?" Olivia asked, her hand in Thomas's. "Staying here instead of drifting on? You have seen so little of the world?" Thomas turned to look at her, his eyes as blue and clear as the day she had first seen him through her cabin window. "I have seen everything that matters. I have a wife I love more every day, children who make me proud, a home that is truly mine, and a dog who finally trusts me." He raised her hand to his lips and kissed her knuckles. "The rest of the world can drift along without me. I am exactly where I want to be." Zeus lifted his head from his paws and looked at them, his tail giving one slow, approving wag before he returned his attention to the children. Thomas laughed softly. "See? Even Zeus agrees with me." "He always did have good judgment," Olivia said, leaning her head on Thomas's shoulder. "Even when he was trying to tear you apart, he was really just testing you, making sure you were worthy." "And am I? Worthy?" "Every single day." They sat in comfortable silence as the sun set over their land, over the life they had built together through patience and trust and love. In the distance, the mountains stood eternal and solid, and closer their children played under the watchful eye of the dog who had brought them together, the dog who had known before either of them did that Thomas Oakley was meant to stay. When Zeus passed 2 years later, they buried him on the hill overlooking the river, near where Olivia's father rested. Thomas carved a marker that read Zeus, faithful friend and guardian, and they stood together with their children, telling stories of the massive mastiff who had protected them all and who had, in his own way, been responsible for their happiness. "I never thanked him properly," Thomas said quietly as they walked back to the house afterward, Lucy's hand in his and Samuel walking ahead. "For what?" Olivia asked. "For giving me the time I needed to earn his trust, for not tearing my throat out that first night, for teaching me that the best things in life are worth being patient for." He stopped walking and turned to face her, his free hand coming up to cup her cheek. "He brought me you." "We brought each other," Olivia corrected, kissing him softly. "You, me, and one very stubborn, very wise dog." The ranch continued to flourish over the years. Samuel grew into a fine horseman who took over more of the daily operations as Thomas's hair went gray and his hands developed the ache of too many years of hard work. Lucy married a young veterinarian from Spokane and moved into town, though she visited often with her own children, who begged their grandfather for stories of the wild days when the territory was rougher and life was harder. Thomas and Olivia grew old together on the land they had built, their love deepening with each passing year, each challenge weathered, each joy shared. On their 40th anniversary, their children and grandchildren gathered at the ranch for a celebration. Thomas stood with difficulty, his bones protesting, and raised a glass. "To my beautiful wife," he said, his voice still strong despite his years, "who gave a drifting cowboy a reason to stop drifting, who trusted me when she had no reason to, who built this life with me brick by brick, day by day, and to Zeus, who knew before any of us did that I belonged here." Olivia stood beside him, her hand finding his with the ease of 40 years of practice. "To my patient husband, who sat in the dirt all afternoon waiting for my dog to accept him, and who has been patient and kind and good every day since. I love you, Thomas Oakley. I loved you then, and I love you now, and I will love you always." They kissed to the cheers and applause of their family, and later, when the celebration had wound down and their children and grandchildren had departed, they sat together on the porch in the same spot they had sat 1,000 times before. The moon was bright overhead, just as it had been on that night 40 years ago when Thomas had finally confessed his love. "Do you remember?" Olivia asked softly. "That first day?" "Every moment of it. The way you looked through that window, terrified and wounded. The way Zeus wanted to kill me. The way I sat in the dirt thinking I was the biggest fool in the territory." Thomas's arm was around her shoulders, and she leaned into his warmth. "Best day of my life, in retrospect." "Mine too. Even with the bullet wound and the terror and thinking I was going to die. We have had a good life, haven't we?" "The best life," Olivia agreed. "Better than I ever imagined possible." They sat in silence as the stars wheeled overhead, two people who had found each other in the wildness of the frontier and built something lasting, something real. When Thomas finally spoke again, his voice was drowsy but content. "If I could go back and tell that drifting cowboy anything, you know what I would say?" "What?" "I would tell him to be patient, to sit in the dirt and wait, to earn the trust of the dog, because once you do, you will earn the heart of the woman, and that will be worth more than all the drifting in the world." Olivia smiled in the darkness. "And if I could tell that frightened woman anything, what would you say?" "I would tell her to trust the man who is patient enough to wait, to let down her walls and take a chance on love, because that cowboy sitting in her yard is going to give her everything she never knew she needed." She turned her face up to his. "I would tell her that sometimes the best things in life come in the form of a stubborn man and an even more stubborn dog." Thomas laughed softly and kissed her forehead. "We were all pretty stubborn, weren't we? You, me, and Zeus. The perfect combination." They stayed on the porch until the chill of the night drove them inside, moving with the slow care of people who had earned every ache and pain through years of honest work and honest living. In the bedroom, Thomas helped Olivia with the button she could no longer quite reach, and she helped him with his boots that had become harder to remove as arthritis settled into his joints. They had performed these small acts of service for each other for 40 years, and they would perform them for as many years as they had left. As they settled into bed, Olivia's head on Thomas's shoulder, his arm around her waist, she thought about the young woman she had been, alone and afraid in a cabin with a bullet wound and a protective dog. She thought about the cowboy who had been patient enough to wait, kind enough to help, strong enough to stay. She thought about Zeus, wise in the way that only animals can be, who had tested Thomas and found him worthy. "I love you," she whispered into the darkness. "I love you too," Thomas whispered back. "Always have. Always will." Outside, the wind moved through the pines, and the river ran its eternal course, and somewhere in the darkness it was easy to imagine a massive mastiff keeping watch over the family he had protected in life and would protect still in memory. The ranch slept peacefully under the stars, built on a foundation of patience and trust and love that would endure long after its founders had gone. And in the morning, Thomas and Olivia would wake together as they had for 40 years, ready to face whatever the day brought, secure in the knowledge that they had found what so many search for and never find. They had found home, not in a place, but in each other, and that was the greatest gift of all.